Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Gwendolyn Reese. I am the Director of Research, Teaching, and Learning here at American University Library. And I want to welcome you all today as we celebrate our Library Student Research Awards. So welcome to the award winners. Welcome to their friends and family, both here and online. Welcome to the faculty mentors and to all of the library faculty and staff who have supported our students. So I'm so happy that we could come together to celebrate the excellence of our students in an enterprise that is so fundamental to the library's values and identity, namely research. So research is the creation of new knowledge. And I think that in this moment in which so much of our societal kind of bandwidth is taken up thinking about artificial intelligence, I would like to have a moment in which we can step back and remind ourselves about the importance of this truly human endeavor, which is the creating of new knowledge. So libraries as cultural institutions embody the fact that the discoveries and creations of current generations are always built upon the works of prior generations, and that it is the great work of every new generation to contribute to the storehouse of human knowledge so that it can be built on in the future. So curiosity is a fundamentally human virtue, a human excellence that directs our attention and our intention in novel ways, driving us to explore, to create, and to move from opinion to knowledge in novel ways. So while AI may be a useful tool, this is an essentially human activity of incalculable value. And I am very honored to stand here with all of you and everyone in order to celebrate the achievements of our honorees and the work of all those who have supported you. So, now comes the part where I thank everyone. So I want to first thank Rachel Borchardt, who is responsible for the overall Library Research Awards program, and to the committees that have been serving under her. So for the Donald W. Bowles Award Committees, Katie Hutt, right there, has been our chair, working with Carol Ido from the library, DeMonica Jones from Health Studies, Mahmoud Yusuf from Economics. And then we have the Writing Studies, the Best Writing Studies Paper Award Committee. Clara Issen has been the chair, working with Elaine Munt in the library, Kelly Joyner in Writing Studies, Jocelyn McCarthy in Writing Studies. For the Best Undergraduate Paper Award Committee has been chaired this year by Melissa Becker, working with Stella Hudson in the library, Shonda Vasudev in the library, Michael Creighton in COGOT, and Jeremy Wade in Writing Studies. And the Best Graduate Paper Award Committee members, Sarah Gilchrist has been the chair, Jesse Breen from the University Library has been serving on this committee, as has Scott Bass from SPA, and Amara Decour from Education. So many thanks to all of you. Also, I want to thank G. Davis, the University Librarian, for choosing to use her gift funds to support the awards. And also to the library events staff for putting together this ceremony, Shante Peku and Sydney Henry. I believe they're probably out there still setting up. So many thanks to our AV team, Eric Gordon and Ben Choi, to Luckmuller and the information desk for setting everything up, and for all of the subject librarians in the library for both helping to market and also for supporting our students. And to Alex Washington, who provides back-end support for library, for the award submissions and for the evaluations. I also want to thank all of the teaching faculty who gave recommendations as part of this process. And again, many thanks to both the winners and all of the applicants for your truly inspiring work. We were just talking in the library about how every year this reminds us of why we do what it is that we do. So we're so grateful and impressed with all of you. I also want to give special thanks and acknowledgement to the family of W. Donald Bowles for their financial support of the Bowles Award in this enduring tribute to his work on income inequality and wealth disparities. Dr. Bowles passed last year and is now of blessed memory, and we are so honored to have this award be part of his legacy. So thank you to everyone, and I now invite Rachel Borchardt up to the podium to begin the presentations.
I don't have a lot to say other than to click that so it's not in the way, but thank you all for coming. We have some great awardees. I'm really excited to hear all of the presentations. But with that, we are going to start with the Best College Writing Awards, which will be presented by Clarissa Eisen.
All right, hello everyone. It's good to see you. All first-year students at American University must take a sequence of 2 writing classes in their first fall and spring semesters. These classes are intended to teach introductory college-level writing and research skills that students can transfer to all the other classes they take while they're here. The Best Undergraduate Writing Studies Awards are presented to students who show amazing skills in their research habits, resource usage, evidence of learning, and of course, high-quality writing. So our third place award goes to C.P. Potowski's paper, Who Belongs on the Bookshelf? It contains a sophisticated argument for more LGBTQ representation in children's literature. They did an excellent job using library materials to incorporate a social science lens to their argument. For this reason, the committee would like to award C.P. Potowski with the third place prize for the Best Writing Studies paper.
This will be slightly out of order, sorry.
Okay.
Just pretend you haven't seen that before.
All right. Hi, thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is C.P. Potowski, and during the spring 2025 semester in my Writing 101 class, I worked on a research project titled Who Belongs on the Bookshelf? LGBTQ Representations in Children's Literature. As a women, gender, and sexuality studies major, I knew from the start that I wanted to focus on a queer-specific issue, something that connected both to my academic interests and my personal experiences. I ultimately chose to study LGBTQ representation in children's literature because it's something that impacted me growing up. As I write in my essay, I was never taught about people like me through the books I read as a child. As a result, I was unable to imagine the possibilities for my own identity. That absence of representation made me want to understand not only why certain identities are centered in children's books, but also how that impacts marginalized youth. The American University Library played a crucial role in shaping this project. Through its databases, I was able to explore content analyses of children's books, identify gaps in intersectional representation, and engage with both quantitative and qualitative research. These resources helped me refine my focus and better understand how issues like social discourse and the publishing industry influence which stories get told and which ones don't. Beyond research, the library supported me in more hands-on ways. Halfway through the semester, I visited the library help desk to find LGBTQ+ children's books in the AU library collection. I was able to discover several stories featuring queer youth as central characters. I then took a few of these books and used the children's book space on the 3rd floor, like right over there, of the library, to create a multimedia project that complements my essay. I filmed and produced a video of my own drag queen story hour, in which I played 6 different characters, 5 children and 1 drag queen, and in the video, the children critically engage with the story being read, which reflects why young people should be encouraged not just to consume stories, but to question and analyze them. This project allowed me to explore how LGBTQ+ representation shapes young people's understanding of themselves and the world in which they live. If you want to see it, you can scan this QR code. If you scan it right now, a video will play, so be mindful of that. But yeah, you can view the video component there. I also extended my research into a creative project by writing my own children's book. My goal was to push beyond both heteronormative and homonormative narratives and create a story that challenges systems like racism, sexism, and ableism while remaining accessible to young readers. I also wanted to imagine what inclusive children's literature could look like. I wrote a story called Where the Currents Carry Us. It's about 3 children who don't fit the expectations enforced on them, and instead of being sad about it, they build a boat and set sail to find a place where they will be accepted. I utilized the library's makerspace downstairs to create a physical copy of this book, which unfortunately I don't have today, but if you want to read it, their ebook version is on this QR code. No noise will come from that QR code. Okay. Overall, this project deepened my understanding of how important representation is and how much work still needs to be done in the world of queer representation in children's literature. The library provided many resources that I used to address my curiosities around representation in children's literature, and it allowed me to creatively explore this area. I'm grateful to have had this experience with the library and am honored to be a recipient of this Library Research Award. I look forward to using the AU Library resources for many more research projects to come. Thank you.
Do a lot of manual back and forth today, sorry.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Our second place awardee is Stephanie Lobodanescu, whose paper, Why Future Generations Will Condemn Us, The Moral Cost of Modern Capitalism, impressed the committee with their extensive use of library resources, as well as how they blended their papers into a very thorough and well-argumented argument. The committee was also very impressed with their extensive use of the library resources, which I already said. For this reason, the committee is thrilled to present Stephanie with the second place prize for the best writing studies paper.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Lobodanescu. Thank you again to the Library Committee for selecting this. Just want to give a bit of a background on my paper. It started in my Writing 106 class with Professor Kate Wilson, and the final prompt for the final paper we had to write was stemmed off of the question from philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah, what will future generations condemn or praise us for? So what he argues is that when we look back at moral atrocities of the past, we always ask the same questions. How do people live with it? How could they face themselves? Wouldn't I have done something similar or different to change things? And the unsettling answer that he provides is that people know, they just don't listen. He gives us 3 signs within his writing that a practice that we accept today will likely be condemned tomorrow, which is that first, people have already seen the arguments. Second, that defenders of the practice don't actually offer any kind of moral counter-arguments. They just invoke tradition or human nature or necessity. And third, the one that stuck with me the most, was that supporters will engage in strategic ignorance, which is avoiding truths that might force them to face evils in which they're complicit. So when I kind of sat with those 3 criteria, the answer that kind of kept surfacing for me was that future generations will condemn us for the way that we treat the planet under our modern system of capitalism. And more specifically, it's the main excuses that big actors like corporations and politicians use that people will ultimately condemn us for. I want to take everyone to a place that most people have never heard of, that has sat with me a lot, which is Parkersburg, West Virginia. It's home to DuPont's Washington Works plant. For decades, children were born there with severe birth defects, animals were dying younger and younger each generation, cancer and rare genetic diseases were rampant in the community, and families were using water laced with a chemical called PFOA. And DuPont, as early as the 1960s, knew exactly what the chemicals were doing. They had internal studies, they had evidence, and they kept producing it anyways because the profit from their company was too high to walk away from. So that kind of brings me to my argument, using DuPont as a starting off point, which is that our economic system as it stands rewards greed. You would hope that a CEO who poisons a river would be punished, or at least held accountable, maybe even have a little bit less income in the long run, but the data says the opposite. A 2017 study that I found shows that companies with strong environmental commitments pay their CEOs far less, and that environmentally careless companies actually get paid more. The second thing that I found was that corporations tend to profit from public outrage. When they get caught, our economic system equips them with the tools to manage public perception through corporate social responsibility campaigns. Think sustainability reports, charitable donations, net zero pledges, diversity initiatives company-wide, eco-friendly packaging, all things that are in theory good, but are just used to cover up a broader issue. And third, I found that politicians perpetuate the cycle behind the scenes, and the fossil fuel industry alone spent $219 million in 2024 to influence the election cycle. Agencies that are supposed to protect us just get captured behind the scenes in the industries they're supposed to regulate. I want to take a moment to talk about how I use the library to find all of this, because obviously this paper wouldn't exist without it. Professor Wilson actually started off our research process by walking us through all of the countless library databases that were available. Obviously, JSTOR, Scopus, all of these amazing databases that you can use as a starting point, but the A through Z databases teaching us to use broad keyword searches before refining. That's how I found really important keywords like corporate social responsibility and regulatory capture that were really important for the evidence I used in my paper. It's also how I found a lot of peer-reviewed scholars that I grounded a lot of the definitions that I created within my research. And I also wanted to say a thank you to all of the librarians that came to our class sessions. They walked us how to use Zotero, which was obviously incredibly important for someone at a research institution like American. Librarians also taught us how to follow citation trails and use LibKey, and that was actually one of the biggest things that was most helpful from the library. As someone who never really had access to research in high school and even starting in undergrad, and for someone who can see how hard it is to access research, LibKey and being taught how to use that was incredibly formative. I learned and I read a lot in this class, and while I think the topic of my paper is certainly a little bit bleak, I also found plenty of literature through the library that gave us some solutions and some suggestions on hope for the future. So again, thank you to Professor Wilson and the library, and thank you for recognizing my work.
Okay, thank you so much. And then finally, in first place is Sia Gupta's paper, The Marshall Myth, Rethinking the Impact of U.S. Foreign Aid. The committee was absolutely stunned by this research, the paper with their clarity, the excellent writing, and the impressive research involved. We were most impressed with the fact that the research was able to identify a gap in the scholarly conversation, very unheard of at a first year writing studies paper. So because of their ability to blend sources with scholarly information and going well beyond the expectations of a first year writing studies paper, the committee is pleased to present SIA with their first place prize for the best writing studies paper.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Sia Gupta, and my research is titled The Marshall Myth, Rethinking the Impact of Foreign U.S. Aid. This presentation's a little long, so I'm going to skip some stuff. So, the Marshall Plan is often remembered as a success, but that is partly because of Europe's already strong institutions. Modern recipients of U.S. aid often don't have these same institutions, and yet still, the U.S. uses this story in order to justify new aid programs, even though the contexts are completely different. I will go on to show why applying the Marshall Plan as a model can lead to misguided policies and unrealistic expectations. So the first thing I want to talk about is that the Marshall Plan was an openly strategic plan and was framed as soft power diplomacy, which helped the U.S. gain allies in the long run. U.S. aid is often framed, on the other hand, as humanitarian, even though it often serves a similar strategic purpose. When aid isn't tied to U.S. interests, it is the first to go when Congress makes funding cuts. For example, Somalia's health system absolutely collapsed after the funding freezes during the Trump administration, showing how fragile and dependent this aid can be. This humanitarian rhetoric can hide the political nature of aid and its tendency to create dependence. Next, U.S. aid is typically stable and generous when countries matter strategically, like we just talked about. Especially in Europe, places like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova consistently received support even when U.S. aid was cut. But countries without strategic value, such as Haiti and Somalia, get short-term and unstable aid, which reinforces this dependency. It demonstrates how strategic value often determines who becomes an alliance and who receives proper investment from the U.S. and who will remain a recipient in the long run. Next, I want to talk about China's BRI. China's Belt and Road Initiative funds large infrastructure projects in the Global South, while U.S. aid actually focuses on short-term programs. In many ways, BRI looks more like the Marshall Plan than US aid does in the modern day. Western media often calls BRI a debt trap, but that claim was frequently overstated. The comparison shows how China may be filling gaps left by US aid. US aid also shapes discourse and how Americans view other regions. Europe is often framed as a partner and a success story, whereas Africa is framed as dependent and crisis-driven. These narratives reinforce power hierarchies and illustrate how aid not only affects development, but also constructs perceptions that sustain dependency in our minds. Next, I want to talk about the role of the library, whose role cannot be understated in my research. They were able to help me refine my research topic and conduct a literature review in order to identify that very important gap that we talked about. They were able to provide me with advanced search tools and databases, and we were able to talk to librarians in my class as well. I was also able to ask for advice on the library website with the Ask a Librarian directly, and use resources on the library website not just to conduct research, but for my citations as well and for formatting. Thank you for the library and for my professor for this award. Thank you so much.
While I'm scrolling forward, next up we are going to have the undergraduate awards. Look at all of these things that we... Okay, sorry. Just some miscommunications from myself. Whoop, okay, too much. There we go. Okay, so next we're going to move to the undergraduate awards presented by Melissa Becker.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming today. I'm Melissa Becker, Chair of the Undergraduate Student Research Awards Selection Committee. The Undergraduate Research Award is available to all undergraduate students, and they could submit any paper from any class on any subject. Every year we get fantastic paper submissions, but this year selecting the winners was particularly difficult, as there were so many works of exceptional quality in the pool. After much discussion, we found that we could not do our due diligence without offering an honorable mention, as well as first, second, and third prizes. We are delighted to honor these 4 students today. First up is our honorable mention winner, Taha Vahanvadi. I am sure that we have all seen memes, YouTube videos, and late-night host monologues that use humor to make political commentary, and we know how they affect us personally. But what if you wanted to know what their broader impact was? How could you even measure that? How would you select your data among the vast amount of social media we are exposed to every day? Taha was able to figure out a way to do that. The committee appreciated the creativity and original thought that went into Taha's analysis of comedy forms. As one committee member said, it required more than just finding text to cite. It meant having the scruples to grapple with nuance and to understand the strengths and limitations of one's sources. Taha's personal experience with facilitating civic dialogue, and you may have seen that he just won the AU President's Award for Civic Engagement, and his experience as an amateur stand-up comedian undoubtedly helped him sort through it all. I would like to call Taha to the podium to tell us more about this intriguing project.
Hi, everybody. Thank you to the library for this honorable mention. I know that this is the first time in a while, or maybe first time ever, that there's an honorable mention. My mom really wants me to ask you if there were more than 4 submissions, because she really wants, she's like, okay, first time in a while. My name's Taha Vahanvadi. The impetus of this project, of this question, was to figure out what effect does comedy have on polarization. I've spent a lot of my life trying to be funny. And I also spent a lot of my life trying to engage in bridge building and in peace building. And this was an effort to try to figure out how those two things connect. The idea for this project actually came about because I was reading this editorial in the New York Times talking about how comedy is emerging as a new form of trauma processing in Syria. And I know that comedy is a method that a lot of people use to process traumatic events, difficult instances. And originally my question was to like, what extent is comedy in Syria mitigating intra-sectarian violence? Now, even though the library is awesome and has a gajillion different things, unfortunately, they don't have a robust amount of data on stand-up comics in Syria. Sorry, Olivia. I know you're trying your best. With that being said, I had this idea, and I was figuring out, okay, what can I do with this? There's something here. There's a kernel here that I just want to pop. And so working with my professor, Professor Labas, I was able to figure out, okay, why don't we figure out a proxy, and let's use polarization. And I used the United States and Brazil as case studies because both of these countries have pretty similar democracies, also pretty similar cases of polarization, also pretty similar times of polarization, which is 2016. 2016 was when Lula and Bolsonaro were running against each other in the 2016 Brazil election, and also Trump during the 2016 presidential election. And the two formats of comedy that I was using were memes and what I call digital satire, which is things like John Oliver, Stephen Colbert, and in Brazil, their counterparts are Greg News. Now, just a show of hands here, who thinks comedy decreases polarization? Just a show of hands. Okay, we got a little 6 7s here. Okay, that's fine. Okay, wow. Okay, I was really hoping that you would all raise your hands and I could say, as my mom famously said, you're wrong. But I guess you're right, so that's fine. My mom doesn't have to say anything. Well, I'm glad that you guys are sort of hesitant because my initial impetus was actually much more hopeful. My thought process was that as a comic, there's a lot of ways that we can engage in, especially I do a lot of dialogue work. When people are funny, people loosen up. And that was my thought process. That was the fundamental gut reaction going to this. When people are funny, they loosen up. It makes it easier to do the peace-building work that I do. However, one big surprising piece of information I found is that when doing this research, I had to find a lot of the research about polarization on individual levels. And there's quite a bit of research on empathy. And the idea being is that as a comic, when I can talk about something funny, it's relational, so you can empathize with me. It increases empathy. What I found in a lot of polarization research is that people with higher propensities to empathize, aka somebody who is likely to empathize with another side, is actually more likely and susceptible to being polarized. Because people with higher levels of empathy oftentimes empathize with their own side first versus somebody else. So what that means is that in comedy, the people that I am making fun of, I'm just going to be talking to a group of people who are going to laugh at those people. And if by chance those other group are in this group and I'm making fun of them, they get really upset that they're ridiculed. Now, the two things to note is that these comedy formats are consumed in solitude. People are looking at memes by themselves, or they're watching Stephen Colbert by themselves, which is also why there's a propensity to become more polarized when you're engaging in this comedy. However, there's a sliver, like the thinnest sliver, like Wegovy slimmer of hope. And that is something called transpartisan comedy, which is this idea that people that make fun of partisanship itself. This idea is a lot more in stand-up comics, but again, the research isn't there, so maybe following stand-up comics around and seeing, oh, what effect does it have on their audience might be true. But there is still hope that people who are making fun of the system can maybe get people to think a little bit more critically about the party that they're part of. Thank you again to the library. Thank you again to Olivia, who really yes-anded this entire process. I know this is an incredibly crazy idea to try to figure out how does comedy impact polarization, but I appreciate your help. I appreciate the library for yes-anding me through this, and for saying yes when you were thinking about an honorable mention. So I feel honored and pleasured. So thank you so much.
Too far. There we go.
Okay. Nicholas Roldan, our third place winner, did a brilliant job of analyzing the differences in how U.S. and Afghan media sources framed the concept of jihad during the Soviet-Afghan War. Beginning his project with a research consultation with reference librarian Catherine Ray, Nicholas discovered how to search for sources which helped him understand the multiple discourses that shape how Westerners and Afghans viewed jihad during the conflict. He then conducted a content analysis of visual media produced during the war in both the United States and Afghanistan. An important aspect of his project is his unexpected discovery of a recently digitized but not well known image archive, which yielded data rich enough to cause him to rethink his whole research question. The committee was impressed with Nicholas's growth as a researcher over the course of this project, as well as his ability to compare and contextualize the visual imagery he found. I'd like to call him up to the podium to give us more detail about his process and findings.
So this was my research argument for my question, that during the Soviet-Afghan War, jihad was temporarily re-signified in American and Afghan visual culture through a complex and contradictory web of discourses that reveal the continuation of American Orientalist ideas rather than a break from them. So this is part of a course called Americans Middle East, is my capstone course. And the main argument of this course is looking at this main book. It's focused on this book, Imagining the Middle East, sort of how the knowledge that America produces, the consequences, of that knowledge on the region and on the U.S. I think a fascinating example of this was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, because of the consequences it, of course, had there, but because of later the boomerang effect that it had with events such as 9/11 definitely being tied to this event. I don't have much time, so I guess the historical context, just to sort of give something short, is that in 1979, there's a coup in Afghanistan where a communist government rises to power. A very weak government at that, prompting the Soviet Union to then invade and support this government. This is happening at the same time that Ayatollah Khomeini rises to power in Iran, and so the U.S. sort of is operating in a way where there's the enemy of communism, the totalitarian enemy of communism, and the totalitarian enemy of this new revolutionary Islam, this Shia Islam, which they drew a distinction with the Sunni Islam, which was this Sunni elitist Islam of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, which they allied with to both fight against communism and to fight against what they saw as this dangerous Islam. This is really expanded in Mahood Mamdani's book, the father of the New York mayor, and I use that a lot. So the argument is interesting, perhaps because it spawns from Orientalism, the ideas of Edward Said, which is essentially that knowledge and knowledge production about the Middle East and the Orient has inherently been negative, in the sense that it creates a vision of the Middle East as a irrational place, a place where, not just the Middle East, but the Orient, the other as an irrational, violent being. But here, in the case of Afghanistan, we see that these fighters, these guerrilla fighters of the classified as the Mujahideen, were classified as heroic figures, fighting a just war, a good war against the evils, the Red Star, of the Soviet Union. So I was trying to see how is it that Orientalism is still at play when there's like a positive light placed on the other, and that's where we get into the issue of how the other is framed. There's a process of knowing what is what is jihad, what is the culture, and that process of knowing it and classifying it as a certain thing, specifically a holy war, one that has militarized components, was evident throughout these two documentaries, of the PBS documentary that I looked at and the Stephen Olson documentary that I looked at. And that is one way of classifying what jihad is. But this paper wants to expand this and see how terms in general exist within a spiral of time, within a web of meaning making that changes throughout time, and you cannot be fixed within a certain spatial moment. This is where I uncovered the Afghan Media Resource Center, which sort of expands this question of meaning making surrounding jihad because it includes, the mujahideen themselves as image producers. So this covert operation of funding the mujahideen in Afghanistan was the largest covert CIA spending operation. And it's mainly talked about through the bombs and the weaponry they were given, but they were also given, cameras and recording equipment to spread the word of what was happening in Afghanistan. That was because it was really hard to get reporting in Afghanistan. It was a devastating effects for the Soviet Union. The U.S. really wanted to spread the word. And essentially, by including these voices here, we destabilize the hegemonic power that dominant discourses can have. Through these images, we see at the bottom one, which is one that I analyzed, where the group is no longer confined to the sort of militarized approach of jihad, which in its formal sense means, or in its literal sense just means to strive and in the way of God. The library helped a lot, of course. Here I have an email exchange with Catherine Ray, who is not here. She's at the airport picking up her sister, I think she told me. But thank you so much to her. She emailed me this. I sat with her, and we thought about how I could find stuff about how jihad was depicted, and she gave me this. Good keyword searches, which I then expanded on and found the rest of my project. And thank you to Professor Elizabeth Thompson as well. Thanks.
I'm so sorry that I'm spoiling everyone's slides.
Our second place winner is Shirley Lin, who completed her winning paper for an independent study in SIS. Shirley's research demonstrates how review structures set up during Brexit altered mergers and acquisitions activity between the United Kingdom and the rest of the European Union. Shirley drew on peer-reviewed legal and economic scholarship to provide a foundation for her methodology and created an original data set using resources such as the library's Bloomberg terminals and a platform called Refinitiv. Guidance she received from business and economics librarian Katie Hutt helped her navigate and evaluate financial data sources and to build her confidence as a researcher and analyst. The resulting paper makes a clear, compelling argument that, as her supporting faculty member says, will rival the work of many of our economics PhD students. We congratulate Shirley on presenting this research at the National Conference on Undergraduate Research and invite her up to tell us more.
Hello, my name is Shirley, and I would like to start by saying thank you to Dr. Jennifer Poole for teaching me the econometrics behind this and for giving me the opportunity to continue engaging in economics. So my research is on how firms reallocate capital in response to economic shocks such as Brexit. And so when 2016 had happened, that's when the referendum had occurred, and 51.8% of voters voted to leave the EU for multiple reasons, one of which being reduced regulatory burdens. And so as kind of an idea, I wanted to explore if that was true for firms and if that was true especially for mergers and acquisitions, which is essentially when you go to, say, from the UK into the EU and you desire to acquire a company to gain faster access to that market. And so before, you had a one-stop shop. So pre-Brexit, you had the European Commission overseeing all deals. And then after Brexit, you had the UK Competition Markets Authority and the European Commission. And as you can imagine, that is more regulatory burden, and that's a duplicative process. And so as a result, I wanted to kind of explore how that impacts not only investment behavior, but also firm strategy. And so the library came in clutch when it came to my literature review. So I took it from two aspects. I took it from the economic standpoint, but then also from the antitrust standpoint. So on the economic side, you have this theory of firm heterogeneity. So who can compete in doing mergers and acquisitions and who is able to do these big deals. And those are usually firms who are able to absorb fixed costs when they decide to internationalize. And so I wanted to see if Brexit would decrease the amount of mergers and acquisitions happening as opposed to greenfields. And so you get into the whole idea of why is greenfield different than mergers and acquisitions? Greenfield is different in the way that it's not screened for dual merger review, it's screened for antitrust, so it doesn't go through that process, allowing it to be a good comparison group. And so that's where I kind of step into my hypothesis that regulatory fragmentation is actually going to reduce mergers and acquisitions relative to greenfield investment. And the impact is going to be more on the inflow side, so the EU into the UK. And to do that, I pulled from two sources. I did Bloomberg M&A, which was at the library. There wasn't a big line for Bloomberg. I guess it's not popular here. But FDI Markets also helped too. So I got a lot of data from 2013 to 2024 on the EU and the UK, and I was able to sort for target and acquire. I was able to do that with greenfield projects with FDI Markets. And so one of the data limitations that I had was that for Bloomberg Terminal, mergers and acquisitions was missing over 60% of data for values. And so you can make the argument that although that skews the data, those are actually the firms you want to be looking at, the ones reporting their values, for the reason that those values are from the firms that are going to be the largest, most public firms that are held to the highest standard of reporting. So they are the ones who are going to be impacted most by dual merger review. And so my methodology was a difference in difference framework, and essentially that just allows me to create like a casual identification strategy comparing greenfield, which is my control group, to mergers and acquisitions from the years of 2015 to 2024. And when you look at the regression, it's a lot of like letters, but you're looking for the interaction, so that's just right here. But so what I ended up finding was for deal counts was that we're actually, although you're seeing a decrease from the outflow, which is what we expected because but then for the inflows, you're actually seeing a statistical like significance with the increase. So there's a lot more deals that are being done inwards, which completely goes against what I had originally thought. And then for deal values, you see that there's actually a decrease in both, but there's a larger decrease in the outflows. So although there are more deals happening, they're of smaller value.
On to our first place winner, Robert Cadenasso, who really wowed the committee with his capstone paper, both in the complexity of the issues he addressed and in his logical progression toward a solution. Robert's research focused on reparations for the injustices of colonialism, whether the European Union has a moral obligation to make reparations, and if so, how those could possibly be made legally. To work through this problem, he examined a vast array of source material produced over the course of 70 years, historical economic conventions as well as contemporary and recent critiques of them, treaties, court cases, policies, and joint seminars held by the European and African unions. The resulting analysis is masterful, weaving all of these sources together to advance his argument. In addition to library databases and physical collections, in his submission, Robert credits the 24-hour study access to the first floor and repeated class visits by public affairs librarian Olivia Ivy for the success of the paper. Let's welcome him up here to talk about this amazing work.
First off, I'd just like to say thank you so much. The library resources is exactly what made me able to write this paper. And at 2 a.m., the 24/7 Ask a Librarian chat, I'm sure the other people here to present understand, asking them very niche questions, and they were able to help you out a lot. I started this research with this interesting complexity between the European Union, which is the EU, and the African Union, which is the AU. And I'm going to try to enunciate them clearly as I talk about them. But they hold these joint seminars on transitional justice. And transitional justice includes reparations under a restorative justice framework. So the EU would be sending experts on reparations to discuss global North-South reparations in Africa. So it led to me asking this question of, can the EU's supranational framework actually be a method of providing reparations for historic injustices? To do this, I focused on 3 economic conventions: the Yaoundé Convention, the Lomé Convention, and then the Cotonou Agreement, but it also served as an economic convention. For the sake of discussion here, I'm only going to talk about the Yaoundé Convention, which was from 1963 to 1975. So, as many of you I'm sure know, the post-World War II decolonial era saw many European empires fall, Britain, Germany, France, and it also saw the birth of the European community, including 6 countries: France, Belgium, Netherlands, Italy, Luxembourg, and Germany. So as these countries, specifically France, had their colonies gain independence, they wanted to essentially institutionalize their colonial policies through the European community's supranational framework. So what that means is that these 6 countries in the early 1960s approached their former colonies, 14 of which were France, 4 were Belgium, and then 1 was German, and entered into economic conventions with them that gave them unparalleled access to their economies and essentially kept these newly independent nations economically dependent on Europe. As you'll see more explicitly with the Lomé Convention, it also had the impact of disrupting further African integration and the promotion of economic trade amongst African countries. Now, the reason I'm stressing the impact is that initially I wanted to do a lot more with the actual archives of the EU. Unfortunately, in 4 months, it's very difficult to go through 70 years of treaty negotiations, especially when I thought I liked to talk, but they really like to talk. What was also difficult with Yaoundé is that I can read French, but an English-speaking country didn't join the European community until the UK and Ireland in the 1970s. So most of the documents in Yaoundé I was reading in French, which I am good at, not great at, as my roommate likes to remind me. So I looked at it, and through looking at its impact and applying a reparatory framework specifically focused on global North-South reparations, I argued that the EU, as a supranational entity, would owe reparations for their economic conventions. Now, I keep saying supranational. Obviously, EU member states have their own individual colonial histories that they need to deal with. The issue is that the EU entered into these conventions as a supranational entity as opposed to individual member states. From there, I looked at the current EU treaties, think of like their constitution, to see what power would they have to actually provide reparations if they so chose. And I looked at 2 avenues. I looked at a judicial route and a political route. The judicial route, which I can go into more afterwards if people are interested, was not viable for providing reparations. But I argued that the EU actually has treaty competency to provide reparations politically, which would mean the European Parliament and the Council agreeing and negotiating with these former mostly African states, but also Caribbean and Pacific states, to provide reparatory packages specifically addressing the harms that these economic conventions placed on these states. In addition, I argue that because the EU funds many transitional justice projects in Africa already, not only does it have the treaty competency to provide reparations, but it has a pre-existing infrastructure to give reparations, again, sufficient to political will. Unfortunately, after 4 months of researching this and really working on the nitty-gritty, I had to include at the very end of my paper a discussion of the fact that political will in the EU, even though it's supranational, is dependent on member states. And if member states refuse to provide reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, they're not going to be open to providing reparations for neo-colonial economic conventions. So it was sort of a bummer to end on, but that is the direction that my research took me in. And I'd like to say thank you so much to the library for all their help in terms and all the resources that they provided. Thank you.
I scroll through these wonderful presentations we just listened to, we're going to move to a new category, which is the W. Donald Bowles Award. Whoop, there we go. Presented by Katie Hatt.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'll just say a quick word about the Bowles Award. There's some text on the screen that speaks to it a little bit, and Gwendolyn Reese also sort of took us through the Bowles Award as well. So again, this award is endowed by the late Professor Emeritus W. Donald Bowles, and we thank again his family for their continued support of this award. Papers in this category should reflect Bowles's interest in wealth inequality, poverty, and other topics related to the consequences of economic disparities. Students who submit for these awards may have explored these topics within a course in any subject area, which we'll see. And we really feel the committees feel that the undergraduate and graduate award recipients really embody the legacy of late Professor Bowles with their research. Here we go. So I'm pleased to announce Estella Miller won the W. Donald Bowles Award for undergraduate students. Estella's submission was an unessay. It took the form of a map of food sources in Noga. Am I pronouncing it right? Is it Noga? Neoga, thank you. Okay, so it's phonetic. Neoga, Illinois. It was a delight to review. Neoga is a rural community wherein the modern economy has changed many of the ways that residents can access food. So many of the local resources have been replaced with national change. This is a story that probably many of us are familiar with. Miller approached this subject with a great deal of care and used a variety of media, including recorded interviews and GIS software, to really paint a full picture of this community that the committee also felt really centered local residents and their lived experiences. Her work shines a light on both how modern economic forces can create greater disparity in many communities, but also how residents are dealing with this challenge in a way that is deeply humanizing. In her recommendation, Estella's faculty sponsor, Professor Alana Warner-Smith, noted that Estella was inspired by readings on food deserts and food apartheid. And furthermore, Professor Warner-Smith relayed that Estella was invited to present her work at AU's Robin Rafferty Mathias Student Research Conference. So congratulations on that. The Bowles Award Committee was particularly impressed with the way in which Estella wove a variety of resources together to create original scholarship on this important topic. Estella was able to make her primary sources for this project really come alive through interviews, photos, videos. And in addition to the interview she conducted and her use of GIS software to create a map, Stella also used a variety of secondary sources that she found in the library's anthropology databases. Estella, your unessay was a real pleasure to take in, and I am so pleased to present you to discuss your paper.
Hello, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to be presenting my project, which I created for the course Health Geographies under Dr. Warner-Smith. For this project, I created a counter map of my hometown, Neoga, Illinois, which emphasizes the failures of fast capitalism and demonstrates how traditional and local foodways such as community grocery stores, foraging, and hunting provide locals with agency in the rural Midwest. Additionally, I wanted my project to not only have academic value, but be able to live a second life as a resource to those who live in Neoga. So Neoga is a community of 1,400 people and has four churches, a Casey's, a liquor store, and the Neoga IGA. However, last year, the IGA, which is a local grocery store, closed. For residents without a car, this was a huge loss, as the next town over, Effingham, is 20 minutes away by car. So this event led me to ask, how do traditional and local food geographies create community in Neoga? How are local food sources under attack in Neoga? And how do local people continue to resist the loss of local food sources? Oh, there it goes, sorry. I chose to approach this project as an autoethnography. The interview transcripts were coded into 4 categories using the software tool NVivo. And those included existing traditional food sources, lost local food sources, and non-traditional food sources, and unrelated information. These categories were then further categorized into local food source locations, and pins were used to signify sources in Neoga. So a green pin was a local food source, a red was a lost food source, and a red star represented an outside chain or food source that had entered Neoga. So when the pins are clicked, there's a blurb giving information on the location, as well as additional visual media. And so I've included these videos to help visualize how media was incorporated into my project and to demonstrate some key players in the story. So I'm just going to play a short clip of one of them so you can understand the interview style I used.
Too, but the base is the farm community, and a lot of them are retired because they have time to go just hang out at the depot in the morning, and they go every morning, and they go there starting at about 7 when it opens. That's probably not right, probably 6. And the pickup trucks all pull in, and the same guys go in and sit at the same seats at the same tables. It's kind of divided against 2 groups. They're not politically divisive, but they're just, I don't know, for some reason, they sought their own level of interaction, and they sit just like a high school lunchroom where everyone sits at the same table every day. These are old guys doing the same thing. They've known each other since they were in first grade, and a lot of them.
Okay. So overall, the key results of this study revealed that traditional and local foodways were important to local residents because they gave a sense of agency from outside influences, fostered a sense of home, and represented the changing of time through the changing of seasonal foods. This had strong resonance with the work of scholars such as Asante Reese, who explored how urban gardens played a role in the 9th and 10th Ward in DC. So while we were exploring very different power structures, I saw a similar resonance in the way that traditional and local food sources give locals agency. Moreover, my results revealed that fast capitalism had impacted local businesses primarily through the opening of the Casey's and Dollar General, which crowded out the local Neoga IGA. Finally, while this study revealed that traditional foodways helped to break down power structures, it also explored how traditional foodways upheld certain power structures, particularly women's gendered experience of space in Neoga, and how they were excluded from certain traditional foodways, and then how women move through this experience and how that experience has changed for women. So overall, this countermap aimed to represent a geographically isolated group not typically studied in the literature I reviewed, and my next steps for this project will hopefully include moving the spatial data from GIS to a more permanent home that could be distributed to Neogans. I want to give a huge thank you to the AU Library. This is where I learned how to use GIS in the Geospatial Lab, many hours. And a huge thank you to Dr. Breen, who's helping me transfer this project from GIS to a more permanent home, because GIS can be a little bit tricky to share projects between people.
The Bowles Committee selected Hua Vo as our graduate award winner. Hua's paper, Who Decides About Work, Inter-Household Decision-Making Power and Women's Labor Supply, looked at how household decision-making patterns impact female labor force participation in a developing economy. Using data from the Indonesian Life Survey, Vo examined and tested a link between decision-making in the household and women's employment, concluding that the more a woman is involved in decision-making within the household, the more likely she is to be employed. This original research has clear implications for gender equality and improving economic disparity, and really embodies the spirit of the Bowles Award. Hua's recommendation from Professor Mika Mers noted that Hua's work shines a light on this under-researched topic of the role of the household structure in examining economic advancement. Again, emphasizing the impact that original research like this can have. On the research side, the committee lauded HUA's use of primary data sources, such as the Indonesian Life Survey, in addition to other library resources, such as our databases and our subject guides. HUA also used Zotero, a citation management tool, which made the writing and research process more efficient. Plug for using Zotero. I am so pleased to present HUA to discuss her paper. Congratulations. We're presenting online.
With luck, we should hear HUA soon.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Katie, for the introduction, and I'm very honored to receive the award. So this research is done as part of my dissertation under the guidance of Professor Mears and also Professor Radchenko. So my research is on who decides, intra-household decision-making and women's labor supply, using the evidence from Indonesia. And you can see in the background of the slide, that's a map of Indonesia, which is a country in the Southeast Asia. And to start with some context, as you may or may not know, there's a persistent gender gap in labor force participation in many developing nations in the global south, and that includes Indonesia. Indonesia is actually the world's fourth most populous country, with a population of 287 million as of this year. So understanding these patterns will have a large economic implications. So most of the explanations for this, gender gap will be has been focused on factors such as, education or wages or labor demand. But as you can see on this graph, since 90s, this has been a persistent gender gap in labor force participation between men and women, and this is for Indonesia. And this is despite the fact that the educational gap has actually closed between boys and girls in Indonesia. So I take a step back, looking at who decides within the household about the women's work. So this leads to my main research question. How does the decision-making within the household relate to married women's labor outcome? Or in other words, whether she works or not. So we can briefly go through a conceptual framework and methodology. So the framework starts with think about it as very basic household trade-off. On one hand, whether the wife works or not, the benefit is obviously bringing additional income from her employment to the household. And on the other hand, you think about the cost. That would be opportunity cost, like the time constraint that takes away time for her to do, the housework, caregiving responsibilities, like the unpaid work that women usually do within the household. And it's also the social expectations around conforming to gender roles. So decision making obviously matters. So whether a woman works or not depends not only on just economic returns, but also on how the trade-offs are decided within the household. And in order to study this, I use an empirical approach based on a probit model, where I estimate the probability that a woman is employed as a function of her and her husband's decision-making on whether she works or not. A main feature of my approach is that I incorporate both spouses' responses as opposed to, only incorporating one side, which is common in the previous literature. And this allows me to capture the differences in perceptions within the same household. And in terms of results and the findings, not surprisingly, women who actually report, greater involvement in decision about their own work are significantly more likely to be employed. And also, if you look at the husband's reports, then the less he is involved in this decision, the more likely the wife is employed. So to quantify this, if husband is the sole decision maker, then the woman is about 50% less likely to work compared to women who are in a joint decision making type of household. And on the other side, we have the wife. When the wife is the sole decision maker, she's about 5% more likely to work compared to the women who live in a joint decision making type of household. We also document in the study that there's a discrepancy in how men and women report decision making. So this might reflect different perceptions or could be also reporting bias that are shaped by these social norms. We also show there's a persistent pattern over time. So that's consistent with this idea where the gender norms continue to constrain women's labor market outcomes, especially in countries such as Indonesia. And in terms of implications, these findings have several implications. From the policy perspective, increasing women's employment is not only about improving the labor market access and opportunities, but it also requires addressing social norms and power dynamics within the household. Then from the measurement perspective, we should be relying on both respondents to this question of who makes the decision making. And it's important to incorporate multiple perspectives that gives it a more complete picture. And the broader takeaway here is that economic behavior, such as decision about employment, is shaped by inter-household decision-making processes, and it's not just done as an individual decision in isolation. So that's important in terms of designing incentives and policies to increase the labor force participation. And finally, I would like to thank and acknowledge the AU library resources that were very helpful and essential in my research process. That includes, using the AU library catalog and search functions that provides plentiful access to various academic journal articles on not only economics, but, also other social sciences, women's studies, sociology, and so on. Also, this was consortium loan service that allows me to access, books from the other institutions. And I also thank librarian Katie Hutt for organizing the subject guides, especially on the economics. I really thank these subject guides in terms of the rich journalist that was listed there. That was very helpful, and also access to databases such as Econ Literature, CEPR, JSTOR, and BER, and of course using the Dotero reference was great and essential in managing the citations and references. So thank you very much.
Thank you. There's always trade-offs with doing hybrid events. We want to increase participation as much as possible and make it possible for people like Hua to present when they can't be here in person, but it's certainly creates difficulties, and we are very, very grateful to Eric Gordon and AV for making this all possible. We have one final award, and then we can all have some snacks afterwards. So the Best Graduate Award is going to be presented by Sarah Gilchrist.
My least favorite thing is to stand between people and snacks. So I'm going to provide a short introduction. This is the second year that we've hosted a graduate paper award, and we were really impressed with the selections that were submitted this year. And we had a tough decision to make because several of our papers were highly recommended. Is it showing? Yeah. And so Thomas Gormley's paper stood out to us because he shared a paper that was written in his first year as a graduate student, and we noticed that his journey through using the library was really demonstrated in that writing, and we were really happy that he not only mentioned that I came to his library or to his class, but that he used a lot of other source materials. But he showed development of graduate research skills. He included databases. He met with librarians. He found lots of different sources that he combined in a way that showed that he had deep and meaningful understanding about his topic. His paper was titled "The End of the Third Site: Policy, Politics, and Perceptions," and when he hit a barrier in trying to find research, he didn't stop. He persisted, and he used a lot of other library sources to find primary source material. So we noted that his faculty sponsor said that this was one of the best papers that they had seen in their career, and that resonated very highly with us. And our committee recognizes that Gormley's work demonstrates an amazing effort for first-year graduate research, and we are very happy to see his work being honored today. So I'm going to invite him on.
Thank you so much. I'm about to graduate from my MA program in a few weeks, and it's a real privilege to share my research and speak about the AU Library, which has been such an important part of my success here over the last 2 years. So I wrote this paper, The End of the Third Site, Policy, Politics, and Perceptions, during my first semester at AU, as someone whose fascination with Russia and the contemporary legacy of Eastern Europe's history helped drive my return to higher education. I was incredibly excited to produce work on a niche but important episode in the history of U.S. relations with the region. The abandonment of the Third Site program, which would have placed permanent U.S. missile defense installations in Poland and the Czech Republic, was a consequential but understudied decision made by a new presidential administration. It remains important to understanding the Obama administration's failed rapprochement with Moscow, and it became the subject of a brief but intense political debate in Washington. Writing this paper during a period of heightened security uncertainty in Europe and shifting transatlantic relationship motivated me to explore this relatively obscure topic. Evaluating the internal dynamics in the White House, Congress, and the Pentagon required combing through memoirs, interviews with former officials, government reports, congressional testimonies, and open source assessments of missile capabilities. That work would not have been possible without the support of the American University Library. I was very fortunate to take Professor Schneider's class during my first semester here. He invited Ms. Gilchrist to speak with our class, and her presentation helped guide my preliminary research, particularly through the Congressional Research Service. I also had the opportunity to meet with library staff for personalized help, finding scholarly sources that discussed the decision and placed it in its broader strategic context. To better understand the internal deliberations surrounding the decision, I turned to congressional hearings and memoirs from key figures both inside and outside the administration. This proved challenging because the decision was not extensively documented in any single place. As a result, my analysis relied on constructing a timeline of events leading up to the announcement, comparing differing accounts, and corroborating those accounts with assessments of adversary missile capabilities. My conclusion reflected that synthesis. I found that the decision emerged from a convergence of interests. The Department of Defense officials supported the practical merits of moving away from the original missile defense system, while key administration officials viewed the shift away as a way to advance broader political and geostrategic goals. At the same time, the decision's wider consequences for allies in Eastern Europe and perceptions of U.S. commitments were not always fully accounted for. This project has led me to continue studying Eastern European security and the relationship between defense policy and diplomacy. Most importantly, it strengthened my confidence as a researcher, both professionally and academically. Thank you again to the library for this recognition, and congratulations to all the other award winners.
So as we conclude our award ceremony, I would just like to take the opportunity to try and advance the slide. Yes? Okay. Can we just give thanks and give a big round of applause to all of the award winners? It is immensely gratifying to see all of the great, if not sometimes bleak, research that you all engage in. And I hope that you will continue on using library resources and serving as a wonderful model for what can be done when students and librarians partner together. I also just want to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you to all the librarians who were mentioned, those that weren't. We will do like an official picture with all of you guys after we conclude. But I am the sole person standing between us and snacks. So with that, I would like to take the time to conclude, and let's retire and let's continue discussing your work with at least some libations to make things slightly more pleasant. No, thank you again to everyone who came.